Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a chef whose combination of French, Nordic, and Minnesota cooking at her St. Paul restaurant Myriel got her named one of Food and Wine's best new chefs for 2024. Here's Karyn Tomlinson. Chef, how are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm great. Thank you so much.
So, one of Food and Wine's best new chefs for 2024? That's quite an honor.
Yes, it is. I mean, honestly, really kind of took me by surprise, but it really means a lot. It's a privilege to be named that. I'm among the ranks of some really amazing chefs who also had that title.
Yes, you are. How far back did your interest in food go? Was it as a child? I mean, where'd you grow up, first of all?
Well, I grew up in Minnesota, and I didn't know that I mean, when I look back now on my childhood, I realize, oh, it kind of adds up. It kind of makes sense what I'm doing now, but I never thought at the time, oh, when I grow up, I want to have my own restaurant or be a chef. I never thought of that really seriously. I'd play in the woods though and pretend like I was cooking with berries and leaves and things that I found. And I grew up in a really hospitable home. My parents were really hospitable, as my grandparents were, and I spent a lot of time in my grandparents' kind of rural farming community that they lived in. So I saw the connection between growing and, sharing food with each other.
And gardening, I guess, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So my interest, I didn't really I asked my grandma, she taught me how to make pie. I asked my mom some things. I would hang out with her while she was cooking, but it wasn't ever my responsibility to cook growing up. And so I didn't really kind of fall in love with the process until really I was out of the house.
And what was that evolution?
Well, I mean, the first time I really started cooking was in my college dorm room on a tiny kitchenette. And it just was in me to want to cook for, or like provide for other people and bring people together around a table.
Because you missed that from home. I mean, I assume you had the big Sunday dinners and such at home.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I grew up exactly. My parents, and it wasn't just our family. They would often invite someone over, someone who was traveling and was at our church or something like that. We would often have other people folded into that. And then every night we would have dinner as a family too. We would sit at the table. We weren't watching TV. It was time together. So that was just normal for me. But then when I was out of college, I was doing something not food related, but I started gardening. I actually lived next to a guy who taught horticulture at the U of M. I had always loved watching my grandpa's garden when I was a kid. And so I asked Ray, my neighbor, if he could help me get a garden started, and he did. And I just had all these vegetables to cook with and had to do something with them. And so I started cooking for people in my life. And really, that's when I started to get fascinated with the whole process of it.
And you decided you should go to cooking school.
Well, naturally. No. At that point, I was thinking I really was ready for a change in my life. I'd been working for a nonprofit for a couple years and it was really good work, but I just needed to do something a little more creative, a little more entrepreneurial. And I thought about doing a number of things, but food was sort of the thing that kept coming up. And that other people were giving me feedback on too, saying, I think you've got something here. This is a great way to use your creativity. But I'd never worked in a restaurant. I mean, the closest thing to that, I guess, is working in a Target deli. I did that for a summer one year. And so I thought, well, I should probably learn a little bit more. I can learn by reading, but it would be good for me to have some training probably. And so I found a program in France at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris where you could choose kind of as much or as little as you wanted to study. And I've always loved French culture.
Had you traveled much before?
Yeah, my dad, because of his job, he traveled quite a bit. My first time overseas was when I was 5. He was doing his PhD that took him to Norway and Sweden. So my mom and I went along for part of that. So the world was a big place to me in my head at that point. And I really feel like I'm most stimulated when I'm in another part of the world or I'm in a different culture. So that was also part of it too. I just needed to get out of here to kind of rethink things.
Did you speak French?
Yes. Yeah. I spoke well enough to get by and to talk to I wasn't fluent, but I did pretty well and was, able to communicate with my chefs, my professors.
This sounds like a simple question, but it's not. Yes, you learn the mechanics. Yes, you learn this. Yes, you learn that.
Yeah,
But for
yeah.
you, what were the big revelations, the big takeaways from culinary school?
That's an interesting question because I didn't go into culinary school thinking that I would be a chef or that I would be in a restaurant kitchen. I just knew I wanted to do something with food. And so I think that affected what my takeaways were from it. But I think for me in Paris, we had access to incredible ingredients, stuff that was coming in from the farms. You think of a Parisian market, I mean, it is pretty amazing. And all the artisanal things, I miss that still sometimes. And learning that working with quality ingredients really affects what you produce, I think that was a huge takeaway. And also, sort of the seriousness and propriety and the importance of cooking. Some people look at that as snobbery, but I mean, I saw it as almost a reverence for a craft that many people kind of treat flippantly. And so, French chefs standing tall and demanding respect and all of that, that taught me the importance of cooking. And also, I learned the importance of keeping a clean workstation and being organized, which, if you don't get that, you can't go very far in cooking.
You mentioned in an interview a phrase, and I don't speak French, so I'm going to mispronounce it, and then you can correct me.
Uh,
Toujours propre?
Toujours propre, yes, means always clean. And so I mean, French chefs would walk around the stations where we were cooking and say this, like reminding everybody to keep it tidy, to be always clean. And when you can do that, that's when you can cook your best.
Were you surprised or enervated by the way the general French public feels about food?
I was in such an intense program at that point that I wasn't there long enough to really absorb much French culture. And I was just wide-eyed and new to the world of cooking, and I could barely afford to, I mean, eat anything besides jambon fromage baguette sandwiches. But in hindsight, I've really appreciated experiences, particularly in Europe, where there is just more of an appreciation for dining, for gathering together around food. It's not just the chefs who take it seriously, but I think it's people eating who take it seriously too. And I know that's changing a little bit with modernization, but I think that is still, a very important part of Parisian culture, of French culture, of other of cultures where and there's just more of this respect around food and dining. And that is really energizing to me.
So you came back to the States after graduation.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I just started knocking on doors and applying to all sorts of places.
But you didn't want to be a chef.
No, so I was kind of entered this is my exploration phase that I entered when I came back. I was paying double rent, so I couldn't afford to stay in Europe, longer at the time and didn't really know what I would do anyway at that point. I connected with an R&D chef, and he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot about the world of food production and test kitchens. That was really interesting. I learned a lot from him. I also started a catering company and I did food for different events, people's weddings, things like that. I don't even remember what all I did. And then I got a job at a little French restaurant in St. Paul. And that was my first restaurant experience, really. And I kind of did a little bit of everything while I was there. And it was there that I really fell in love with the rhythm of restaurants. I was always kind of a book smart person, and I realized there was something energizing to me about being around people who are just kind of people savvy and had good, you have to have good intuition to do well in a restaurant, whether you're cooking or a server. And I loved the pace, the crescendo, decrescendo of every service. It kind of felt almost theatrical. I liked the adrenaline. There was all of it that just was sort of exciting to me. I've always enjoyed doing a lot of things, and I could see that in that business, in the restaurant business, you can really tap into a lot of different gifts.
You were or became a pastry chef there?
I never studied pastry in cooking school. That was very intentional on my part. I only wanted to study savory cuisine. I think I had an idea that just wasn't like any pastry chef I'd met, and that's what all women did in kitchens at the time, and I wanted to do something different. So I mean, I learned some basics in cooking school, but it was a few years after I'd been working at this restaurant that I was offered a job as a pastry chef through a roundabout way at a new restaurant in Minneapolis. And at first I kind of, balked at the idea, but as I thought about it, I realized that it would be a great opportunity for me to learn a little bit of leadership in a kitchen setting and menu development. And it was an opportunity for me to take something and run with it, basically, that I hadn't had yet. And so I thought, well, I can learn. And I did that. So I ended up as a pastry chef for a few years.
And then you went to Sweden?
Yes. Fast forward, did the pastry chef thing, did, I think, pretty well. People started to know me in town for doing that and actually won an award. But I just I realized, okay, I can either choose to stay on this track. Maybe I can become a corporate pastry chef somewhere or whatever. But I wasn't quite sure if that's really what I wanted to do. And I just knew I needed more challenge. So going back to the idea of being stimulated overseas, I decided to visit a couple of friends who were in Sweden and Norway, because that's where I'd traveled as a young kid. My family, moved here from Sweden a long time ago. Some of them did. So I decided to just go for a little bit of a reset and rejuvenation as I was making these decisions. And when I went, I thought, I should go to this restaurant I've heard of called Faviken up in northern Sweden. They graciously fit me in with a single reservation. And I went, and while I was there, I met Magnus Nilsson, the chef of the restaurant, and got to talking. He had actually just been to Minnesota, and he said, well, it sounds like you're at the fork in the road. You could come work here for the winter and work for free for experience.
Now, this is a 2 Michelin star restaurant.
Yes, and more importantly, it was ranked one of the world's 50 best restaurants. I knew that it was having a major impact and influence in other chefs and other restaurants around the world, just in embracing seasonality in a harsh climate, in a challenging 4-season climate, and not turning away from old traditional methods of preservation and things like that.
What kind of dishes?
All sorts of things. I mean, there were a lot of foraged wild ingredients. There were a lot of old processes that people were doing for years and years and years, but they made it really special by highlighting it in a beautiful setting like this.
Such as?
Well, a lot of just really fresh, pure things. Like there was a Norwegian sea scallop, and I don't remember exactly. I mean, this was some years ago now, but I'm trying to remember the exact set. But it was just barely cooked and then served on its shell on some smoking branches. And there weren't many ingredients. There weren't a lot of putsy tweezer things on there, but it was just beautiful, pure ingredients presented in a gorgeous way, in a way that made people probably never think, or they couldn't think about a scallop the same way again after having that. And I loved sort of the simplicity and the straightforward presentation of the food. Definitely a Scandinavian, less is more approach to food that I resonated with.
When you came back to the States, what was your next move?
I was unsure of what to do. I was actually trying to find ways to stay in Europe. Magnus actually recommended that too, but it was just, it's hard in the EU to get a visa at the time. And so I did come back and I did a little consulting, and then a chef reached out to me. Chef Thomas Bamer reached out to me and just said, I'm opening another restaurant. I would love for you to take the helm at this one. And which was kind of a big deal because I had never run a whole kitchen before.
And where was this?
In South Minneapolis. And so it was a small restaurant that had gained a reputation for great hospitality. And, it was part of the kind of farm to table movement of restaurants. There was some good farmer relationships and an emphasis on what we grow here and seasonality. So I said, yes, sure, why not? I've never done this, but I'm going to give it a go. And so I stepped into the kitchen as the chef de cuisine, and I did that really up until right before the pandemic.
How tough was it suddenly being in charge?
Probably tougher than I let myself realize at the time. I mean, it's always a challenging situation when you come in as a leader with a team who's already been there, one of the first things that I did was just completely run through the walk-in and throw things away and reorganize. And I came up with organizational charts, and I just kind of came in with fresh eyes thinking, okay, this can be more efficient. This can be better, blah, blah, blah. But I took time, I think, to sort of establish rapport with everybody. And it was a great team, but it just took a little bit of time. Everybody was really on board with those changes though. So that really helped. And then we did a competition. It was a whole animal butchery competition called Cuisine 555. And that was in my first year there, we ended up winning. So that also helped too.
You said we. My understanding is that this is the preeminent whole animal butchering competition in the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
And that you are the first woman to win
Yes.
it individually.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we were a tiny team at the restaurant, and two of my sous chefs came with me, and so we all pulled it off together. But yes, it was me and my menu, and I did it.
Where did you learn butchery?
There.
At the restaurant?
Yeah. In culinary school, we did like birds and rabbits and things like that, but I never did anything bigger than that there. But at the restaurant, I learned to do lamb and pigs. It really is more about strategy than anything. And that was my perception when the owner of the restaurant asked me to do this competition, or kind of told me I was doing this competition. My first thought was, I'm tiny, and this is kind of like this is sort of a macho thing, I think. And that was the image that I had of it. And honestly is, perpetuated in a lot of ways.
Well, beyond butchery, that's been the image of the professional kitchen anyway.
Right. Exactly. We're chefs like this with a big knife. But I think butchery is actually quite delicate, and many processes are like cooking. You can think about it more in that way, that it's about precision, it's about strategy, it's about efficiency and using everything. It's not about how strong and tough you are.
Were you doing offal there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's a tough sell in America, isn't it?
It is, but I think there are ways that you can kind of do it, ways that you can approach it. What I try to do currently, and we were trying to do there, is build good memories around those things for people. Most people don't have good references when they hear liver, when they hear kidney or things like that. They don't have like this good nostalgic feeling about it because they haven't had it in a good way, probably.
How do you get them to try it?
Good servers. And also enough other things going on in a dish that sounds approachable. Or you put it in a tasting menu where people don't have the option.
Or you could just tell them what's in their sausage.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were there, and then COVID hit. What happened?
After I won that competition, the owners, they had talked to me about coming on to ownership and, rebranding the restaurant. And then in the end, they just realized the funding wasn't there. They couldn't reinvest in the restaurant. And so decided to close it. Right after the restaurant closed, my grandmother, the one who taught me how to make pie, also died. It was just a really challenging time in my life where here I'd been like, I had all this momentum to like launch this restaurant, of which I was also going to be an owner. Then this really pivotal person, is a really important person in my life, died. And I didn't know it at the time, but COVID was about to happen too. So there were just it was this just confluence of things that were really making me think about why I cooked, why I wanted to open something. And I'm really grateful in hindsight for that timing, but it was really challenging at the time. In that in between, before, COVID hit, I did a dinner out in the town that my grandma lived in, Dessel, Minnesota. And that's where I spent a lot of summers growing up. I just wanted to do something to honor her. And so I did a harvest dinner and thought I should see what I can source in the area. I think it's all corn and soybeans, but I'll poke around. As I did that, I just met some really cool farmers who were growing all sorts of things. They were using regenerative methods to build. They weren't labeled organic, but they were farming that way, and lots of innovative people. And so I did this dinner and made these connections. And so once the shutdown happened, these were people that I was talking to and even did some projects with during COVID. COVID happened and I was just thought, do I want to open a restaurant still? Is that important? What is going to be the future of restaurants? And so asked all these existential questions as everybody else was. I really decided that, people are going to need to connect. Humans can't stop that. It's going to happen one way or another. And I would love to help facilitate that. I knew that there would be a lot of fear. We already saw it There was a lot of depersonalization, ordering things online, QR codes, distance. And so I knew that I wanted to do something that had a more human feel to it and a sense of place as well. At the same time, there were a lot of conversations happening around the workplace and restaurants, people realizing how hard restaurants were and how inequitable they were in many ways, and kind of realizing some of the nasty sides of it. And so I really wanted to, I thought, yes, it's terrifying to commit to something like this, but I want to be part of shifting that too. And so I started looking around and found a spot.
Are you telling me you opened a restaurant during COVID?
Yeah, I signed a lease when we were all still masked up and everything was, shut down.
I'm sorry, many people would have told you, or probably did tell you, that was insane.
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely taking a gamble, but I thought that restaurants would come back in some way. I was pretty confident about that, or at least hopeful about it. I guess I'm more of a glass half full person.
You're kind of a glass 9/10 full person, I think.
Yeah. I just knew that it would probably work out, or at least it would hopefully work out. Our landlord gave us a discount at that time, just as many people did, and that was really kind. What it enabled us to do was open slowly. So we basically did construction in this space, didn't have to borrow as much money for it because we kind of did my business partner and I did it by a lot of our own elbow grease and friends and family and, people who were available. And so it just took longer than a normal restaurant open. But we did takeout. We did meal kits for people in the neighborhood at the same time. I'd also been doing Instagram videos, Karyn's Quarantine Kitchen, helping people figure out what to do with those beans in their pantry so they wouldn't have to go to the grocery store. And so I kind of did a spinoff of that and did these takeout meal kits for people in the neighborhood, which was a great way to get to know our neighbors and establish a presence in this community and also build a little bit of a revenue stream so we could pay for some things as we went. So we just did that until the construction was done. And at that point, the mandates were lifted and we were able to open our doors fully. So it actually was a really kind of, I think business-wise, a healthy way to start because we didn't overextend ourselves.
And when you opened full bore,
yeah,
what was the reaction? How'd you do?
Well, it was a really positive reaction. As I look back, I feel like we're so much more grown up now as a restaurant than when we first opened. But I think the heart was always there. And, I think people were just really ready to have something to go to as well. And something that was really intentional and meaningful and thoughtful.
You were named one of Esquire's best new restaurants of 2021.
And we also were reviewed by the Washington Post, which was pretty cool. Tom Sietsema did a beautiful piece about us. And I think, what people recognized was just, and Jeff Gardinier, who was one of the Esquire guys, he talked about really feeling a sense of home. Yes, it's professional. And yes, we do a 13-course tasting menu, but really, I think they felt a different type of hospitality. That and a sense of place in a way that many Midwestern restaurants hadn't really done quite yet.
One writer described your food as channeling grandma chic.
Yeah.
What's grandma chic and what were you serving?
That's a great question. When people hear grandma food, in Minnesota anyway, people think casseroles and like church basement food, hot dishes. That's not exactly what he is referring to. I think that term refers both to an approach on food and on hospitality. It's a spirit of hospitality in which it's really others focused. People feel welcome. There are no expectations of you as a guest. You're so glad to have them. There's a warmth and a sense of nurture to the hospitality rather than a kind of stiffness. With the food, I think of many grandmas all over the place in many cultures. There's a sense of economy and efficiency in how they cook. They use what they have at their fingertips to make the most delicious food that they can for the people in their circle and use every last bit. And so to me, that's we're not using luxury ingredients at Myriel. We're using very simple ingredients from people that we know, and we're using every last bit. And that's, I think, what gives it that sense.
Set me straight. Reading about the restaurant, it's been referred to as provincial French and Nordic and church basement. What are you serving? What is the ethos culinarily?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about it like that, it sounds like we're all over the place, but it's really not. Where there's a common thread between all of those things, all of those cultures, whether it's like your like country, like French cuisine. Let's take that as an example. I was drawn to French cuisine initially because I saw that as a cuisine that uses everything, that's really economical. It sounds fancy maybe to people, but really all of the technique is there to be able to best use everything and make it really delicious. I grew up watching Jacques Pepin and reading Everyday Cooking with Jacques Pepin, the recipe book that my mom had, and using leftovers, using everything to its fullest is important. All of those cultures also have strong preservation techniques, or, preservation is built into the rhythm of eating and cooking. And that's something that in a 4-season climate, like we have in Minnesota, is really important. For example, you are asking about my time at Faviken and seeing all the things, the root cellar of things that they had fermented and preserved and pickled from the growing season. That's something that just makes sense in our climate here too. Anyway, those are things that are common threads with all of those like food cultures, I think, that we exemplify here with the food that we do.
Let's talk about some of the dishes. Apparently, you're serving your grandmother's fried chicken?
That was a recipe for the Wall Street Journal that I did, and I think I did it as a meal kit, or I did it in the takeout days or quarantine kitchen days. Maybe that'll have to make a comeback this summer, actually, now that you mention it. I'm glad that you said that.
Because it's both fried and baked?
Yes, I call it picnic chicken. It's not like Southern fried chicken. It is like just dredged in flour and cooked in butter, so it's a little bit crispy and then baked, and it just is the perfect way of eating summer chicken.
Well, your website says you change what you're serving based on what's
Yep.
available.
Yep.
So what do you serve?
I'll give you some examples. Yeah. Right now we have 3 proteins on the menu. One of them is duck. I think we've always had duck on the menu because we're able to use everything. And, we use the bodies for stock. We use the liver for pate on our charcuterie plates. We confit the legs. We always have duck breast. And we're serving that with a sorghum syrup, a sorghum gastrique, where we have sorghum from some farmers that are probably the last farmers in Minnesota who are growing their own sorghum, pressing it and cooking it into syrup.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. I got to be there actually for that process. We have some lake fish. Lake fish is a thing, when we have fish on the menu, it's lake fish because we're the land of all these lakes and it makes sense for us to do that. We have some of that wrapped in Swiss chard and it's served with an espelette cream.
A who? A what?
Espelette. So these are peppers, or it's actually used often in French and Basque cooking. Peppers grow really well here. One of our farmers grew those peppers for us last year. We dried them and then we are using them now that they've been preserved in that sauce. We're using a lot of our preserved things in our food right now. We have a sausage. We do only whole animal butchery. So right now, that's why we're limited with what proteins we have in any given moment. But I just finished breaking down a cow actually this past week. So we'll probably have some beef on the menu soon.
What kind? What are you going to do? Hanger steak, boeuf bourguignon? What are you thinking?
We'll do all of it. Or we'll do so many different things depending on the cut of meat. We're using some of the big like steak cuts on our tasting menu. And then we will do some braises probably. We'll do some spring stews. We'll do some meatballs, maybe all sorts of things, tartare, all kinds of things that we can do with it depending on the cut. But we do everything in, since we only do whole animals, it's all in proportion. So we don't have like always steak on the menu since there are only so many on a cow.
You're making your own sausage.
Yeah, all of our charcuterie we are making our own vinegars. We're making all of the things. Oh, by the way, that sorghum, the tassels, the actual grains on that, we have that on the menu as well as a little cold salad on a fresh cheese that we make.
Wait. You make your own cheese?
Yeah, we're making fresh cheeses. We don't have you have to get a little more detailed in an aging system. If we were to do that, we would. But yeah, this is a fresh cheese that we're making that we serve the sorghum on top of.
Do you get the milk from a particular place?
Yep. We have a dairy farm that we love working with in Cokato. We're actually able to buy it raw, which, we're cooking as we're making the cheese. So in a sense, it's going through the pasteurization. That also enables us to make some different things that we wouldn't, like fromage blanc, for example. You have to use that rather than pasteurized milk.
Beyond that dairy farmer, you have extremely close relationships with the people producing your products. You go visit, you look at the crops yourself.
Yeah, really the whole year, at least one day a week, I'm out. But then sometimes just depending on schedules and also what's going on in the growing season, sometimes it's more like 2, sometimes even 3 times a week that I go out. It really, to me, has totally changed. Like, I wouldn't be able to cook another way, I think. It makes such a big difference to know the people who are growing the ingredients that we're using. And also, it opens up a door for more possibilities, things that some people might think, oh, no one's interested in this. No one's interested in these like cauliflower leaves.
What are you making with cauliflower leaves?
Oh, we could, I mean, I'm just using it as an example. We aren't currently, but it's something that we could braise or pickle or, there are a lot of things that we could do with it actually, but it's not something that you would ever find on an order guide. So that's different. It just makes us value our ingredients more because we see the work that goes into it. And it also, I think, is encouraging for the farmers that we're working with because they get to see other people enjoying things in a very different way than they might otherwise. So it's a win on both ends, I think.
Does that really translate to the home cook? In other words, does it really matter if I go to the farmer's market?
I think personally it does. And I say that recognizing that everybody has different lifestyles, different capacities, different budgets. Some of my friends who have kids and so many things going on, like there's just no way to really do that. Although now with CSA boxes, there's more access.
Community agriculture?
Yeah, yeah, and there are a lot of ways I think that people can interact with that looks different for everybody. I think at the very least, being aware of what's in season where you live is really important to kind of I think it's important to connect to that, and I think that it does make a difference when you know who your food is coming from a little bit, because let's just say you give me a carrot, a bunch of carrots, and then I also buy a bag of carrots from Whole Foods or something. Well, I'm going to make every little bit of those carrots that you give me count, and I'm not going to let them get shrivelly and hairy in my refrigerator. But if then, like I am this bag of carrots over here, because I know you, I know that you spent time growing these, and that's just an example too. I think that it just increases the value in our ingredients and the joy in eating them and our connectedness to the seasons if we can do it that way. But no one should ever feel guilty for not having time or resources to do that.
It's kind of become a signal that
Yeah.
if you're a foodie, you're cool, you put the extra effort in. How do we get people to eat well without shaming them?
That's a great question because it's really important. And we can't set the bar so high like this that people just give up and don't even try. And that's something that I really want to find ways to address more. I think that encouraging, like just making it really achievable, like what I was talking about, at least learn a little bit about what's in season where you live. And even if you're still going to a grocery store and you have no clue who grew those asparagus spears, they could be growing in your area. You're participating in the rhythm of the seasons. That's something that everybody can kind of do in some way, shape, or form. That's a start. Another thing that I like to think of is maybe you just pick one thing. Maybe you're getting, like the people that we buy our hogs from, they have really cool meat boxes that they sell to people in the community or to the even people in the city are getting them now. So they'll get boxes with some cuts of pork and sausage that has already been made and things like that. Maybe you just kind of splurge on one thing. Maybe it's getting meat from a farmer that you know and respect. And then you work your other stuff around that. You can still go to your big grocery store and get things that you're cooking with these, but at least you're supporting one farmer and you have that sense of connection.
What do you think about the overall state of the way we're eating in America?
That's tough. Well, for one, I think it looks different in many different places and different economic levels. But in general, and I think this is true across the board, I think many of us have become hyper individualized and hyper disconnected from the source of our food. Agriculture was much more a part of everybody's life at one point in time, but with urbanization, all sorts of things, globalization, we don't have the same, even rural areas aren't necessarily connected to where their food is coming from because they might be growing just corn and soybeans and they still have to shop at the local grocery store with food from who knows where. I think that's slowly changing in some pockets, but I think still by and large, we've kind of lost our knowledge of, or just sort of our perception of the value of food because we aren't disconnected from the source and from the work of it. So we don't enjoy it as much and we waste it more. And also, it's interesting because some people who have become interested in foraging and, like farming their own stuff and blah, 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 and cooking. And they have like these blogs about that or Instagram accounts. I don't feel the same sense of wanting to share with a community. And to me, I think that's a really important. It's great if you can do that for your family and if you have the means to do that in the space, but not all of us do. And I think that there's a dynamic of unhealthy independence around eating and food where we're just missing out on so much. So, and that brings it back to the grandma chic thing, where food really is about sharing, it's inclusive, it's involving others. I think it should be for us to be happy and to function well, I should say.
I read that you have a post-work ritual, which is
Having a cup of cereal in my kitchen on my little step stool.
homemade cereal.
Not well, actually, right now I do have homemade granola, but nope, and this is where it comes back to not shaming anyone. We can have our little, like, I right now just finished a box of Honey Cheerios. I have
I'm
no
shocked.
idea. I know. I'm preparing to be canceled right now.
Oh, they're so good though, aren't they?
They are, and with whole milk, it's just such a good. I don't mind having that as a vice if that's what that is. We can't be purists about everything, and I think it's really okay.
What's next for you?
As always, working on Myriel and making sure that that's healthy and sustainable as a business, and the staff is supported and doing everything. We've started some private dining and more programmed events, but I don't plan to, I don't want to start a bunch of restaurants in Minnesota. That's not really the goal here. But I do want to talk more about these things and find platforms for that. So I've signed with a literary agent and slowly working on a book proposal. And so that's one thing. I'm also have been working on a little film project. My dad taught film. I almost studied film, actually. I kind of like cooking. It's a medium that involves, it's art, but it's something you can consume on a regular basis. And it also involves a lot of the senses. I have a really cool opportunity. I hear all these neat stories from farmers that I'm with, and it so has changed the way that I look at food. I want to show that to more people. So we'll see. Those are slow but sure and in progress.
Well, that sounds great, and best of luck with all of that.
Thank you.
Chef, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. I very much appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. Really great to chat with you too, David.
Chef Karyn Tomlinson on Culinary Characters Unlocked. After our conversation, she received even more accolades. Food and Wine named Myriel one of the 15 best restaurants in America. She was shortlisted for the 2025 James Beard Awards. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time